Hey, everybody. If you're here, you're probably considering hiring me to work with either you or your sales team. So I brought Robert Wittwer in, and I have worked with him for many years, and I actually trained his whole sales team recently. And so I wanted to bring him in so he can kind of give you some insight. Hey, Robert.
Hey, Katie, how are you today?
I'm good.
It's
All
great to
right.
see
So
you.
fill us in, Robert. Tell us about how the training went and how you feel like the results were.
Okay, well, I may actually back up even slightly because I think that's a bit of an understatement. Just for so people know, I actually had the opportunity back when I was still an individual contributor and you were just starting doing this. I had opportunity to be one of your first students.
That's right.
As a student who was a successful sales rep at the time, I learned a ton from you. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and it had a pretty profound impact in my coming success over the next several years. During that time, I was able to leverage a lot of the concepts that I learned from you and that I had put in practice to help launch a very large, very successful new segment for my employer at the time. At the time, I worked for Philips Healthcare, and I have a lot of years of applying those principles before I was even in leadership. And subsequently, once I was in leadership, I knew that the things that you teach, that they work and that they're really sound principles. And honestly, to a degree, they also go against the grain where the industry seems to be going, but in a really good, really rock solid way. So I've had, as Katie said, I've actually had her in to train first a very small portion of my sales force, and then within a year and a half of that, a much bigger piece of my sales force at my former employer. I would say that the results of those trainings were just super positive. One example, for instance. One of the people that I put through that training was one of my newer sales reps, but that I recognized just because of my experience as a sales leader, I recognize as this is an A player. This is somebody who can really achieve if they're given the right tools to do so. That particular sales rep, to the best of my knowledge in her history at the company, that she had been there just a little bit before I started, had never actually achieved her quota number. She'd been there for a couple years, but after going through your training, the next year, she was able to leverage the concepts that you had taught her, and she ended up finishing 254% to plan. Yeah,
Oh
pretty
my
phenomenal.
gosh, that's so great.
Not just that, she attributed, a big chunk of that success to those principles that she had learned. She put those, she's one of those people that just puts things in practice, and you laid it out for that particular cohort that it went through training. You really laid it out in a way that was easy to follow, that made logical sense, and that challenged some people's thinking. In talking to several of my sales reps who have been through your training, they all felt like it was good, solid stuff that they were able to apply. Not 100% wholly just, as a rote set of steps, but something that they were able to adapt to their product and their style and really find success with.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Yeah. And the thing I think that is really important about what you said at the beginning about your experience is that you were pretty experienced as a sales rep.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I have this barrier where people will say, my sales reps have been around for long enough. Like, it's kind of almost insulting. You don't need to train them. They're good. But as you said, you actually got something out of it, even though you're pretty experienced.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We get stuck in our ways, and if we're not exposing ourselves to new things, and sometimes even just exposing ourselves back to the basic things, if we're not willing to do that, we're not going to grow. Nobody is at the top of their game all of the time. And bluntly, I find some of the really experienced, really highly compensated reps can very quickly get into a groove where they just don't take those extra steps to push things across the line. But because they've got longer term relationships, because they've got longer term success in the space, they get away with it because you don't realize they're not achieving the best they can achieve because they're doing really well, but they could be doing a lot better.
Right. And sometimes it's just about the motivation, like give somebody a fresh idea and all of a sudden they're re-energized and remotivated. Even if they've been around for a long time, just a fresh idea can make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It's always funny to me how it seems like there's a movement in our industry as business to business salespeople with a complex value proposition that wants to push us to letting a computer do our job for us. And, as your research has shown really clearly, that's not the best way to do it. And it's not going to be as effective as some tried and true methods, as well as some of the things you've researched that are, a little more on the innovative side.
Yeah. Well, and that's a big part of my training is the research that I have done. I think it's so important I did something recently on becoming a mind reader. It's just so important to understand how customers think and the challenges they're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love your podcast and hearing from real customers. And there's been several times listening to the podcast over, since you started, where I've had to take a double take and say, oh, I never really thought about it through that lens that the customer's thinking about it through. And yeah, I can see where that really is pretty annoying.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, that's so awesome. I think this was really helpful for anybody who's kind of considering it and sort of on the fence. And really, what I like to do is really give people a lot of practical, concrete ideas, which it sounds like that was what was really great for your team. So it's really nice to hear about it actually being successful and in practice.
Yeah, and I will just throw in a plug for you. I will say, as a leader of highly effective salespeople for quite a few years now, if you're going to take one thing and you're going to spend money on one training thing, you won't go wrong choosing Katie.
Well, that is very nice. I'm really appreciative that you were here, and really excited that I got to work with your team. It was really fun.
Yeah, thanks so much.